The notification wasn't supposed to reach my phone. But sometimes the universe conspires to show you exactly who the people you trust really are. That's how I discovered my husband was toasting champagne with his mistress while I sat at home celebrating what I thought was our anniversary. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special. I can't wait to share. The soft chime of Marcus's phone echoed through our kitchen in Willowbrook Heights, cutting through the gentle hum of the dishwasher I'd just started. It was 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday in late September, and I was arranging the takeout from Bella Vista, his favorite Italian place on our best china. Our 15th wedding anniversary deserved something special, even if it was just the two of us at home. Marcus had emerged from his shower 20 minutes earlier, wearing the navy suit I'd bought him for his birthday, and that cologne that always made my heart skip a beat. He'd kissed my forehead with unusual tenderness and told me he had to handle one last work emergency at the office, but that he'd be back by 8:30 for our anniversary dinner. "Just need to grab some files from my desk," he'd said, straightening his burgundy tie, the one I'd given him last Christmas. Thompson Industries is breathing down our necks for the quarterly projections, and Diana's been working overtime to get everything perfect for tomorrow's presentation. Diana Castellanos, Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle Consulting Group, where Marcus worked as Vice President of Strategic Development. I'd met her at several company events, polished, professional, with striking auburn hair and a smile that seemed just a little too bright whenever Marcus was around. But I'd dismissed my occasional uneasiness as simple insecurity. After all, Marcus had never given me a real reason to doubt him. The phone chimed again, more insistently this time. I glanced over at where he'd left it charging on the granite countertop, its screen lighting up with each notification. Marcus was notorious for forgetting his phone everywhere, a habit that used to drive me crazy during our early years together, when I'd worry about reaching him in emergencies. Now, after 15 years of marriage, it had become just another endearing quirk of the man I'd built my life around. The third chime made me look up from the breadbasket I was arranging. The screen was still glowing, and I could see the edge of what looked like a group chat notification. My curiosity wasn't malicious. I was simply wondering if it was his mother trying to coordinate weekend plans, or maybe his college friends organizing another one of their quarterly golf outing. I walked over to turn the phone face down, wanting to preserve the intimate atmosphere I'd worked so hard to create. Our dining room table was set with candles, the good wine was breathing, and I'd even picked up the chocolate-covered strawberries from that little shop downtown that Marcus always raved about. But as I reached for the phone, another message appeared on the lock screen, and the preview text made my blood turn to ice. Diana's promotion party group chat. Marcus, she absolutely deserved this promotion. Can't wait to see the look on Victoria's face when she finds out. Diana, stop it. But seriously, thank you for all your help getting me here. Tonight's celebration feels so much sweeter knowing you'll be there. Marcus wouldn't miss it for the world. Rosewood Terrace at 8. I told V I had to work late, so we should have plenty of time to properly celebrate. My hands started trembling as I scrolled up to see more messages, each one feeling like a physical blow to my chest. The conversation had been going on for weeks, inside jokes, shared memories, plans made in secret, but it was the casual way Marcus referred to me as V that made something sharp and cold settle in the pit of my stomach. Not Victoria, not my wife, just like I was an inconvenience to be managed rather than the woman he'd promised to love and cherish. I sank into one of our kitchen bar stools, still holding the phone with shaking hands. The Rosewood Terrace. I knew that place, an upscale wine bar in downtown Millfield, about 20 minutes from our home. Marcus and I had been there once for our 10th anniversary. He'd told me it was too pretentious and suggested we find somewhere more our style for future celebration. Apparently it was perfect for celebrating with Diana. The messages continued, painting a picture that became clearer and more devastating with each exchange. This wasn't just a work friendship that had crossed some boundaries. This was something planned, calculated. Diana had gotten promoted to regional marketing director, a position that, according to the messages, she'd secured with Marcus's help and influence. The promotion that he'd helped her achieve while I'd been encouraging him to push for his own advancement wondering why he seemed so content to stay in his current role when I knew he was capable of so much more. Now I understood why. He hadn't been focused on climbing the corporate ladder for our family's future. He'd been busy building someone else's career while building a relationship that apparently included mocking me behind my back. Another message popped up from someone named Jake Morrison. Should we order champagne? This calls for the good stuff. Diana responded immediately, already taken care of. Ordered a bottle of Cru Grande Cuvée. If we're celebrating, we're doing it right. Marcus replied, perfect choice. V thinks I'm at the office crunching numbers. She'll probably be asleep by the time I get home anyway. These late nights are finally paying off. The casual cruelty of that message hit me harder than all the others combined. While I'd been planning our anniversary dinner, choosing the wine that would pair perfectly with his favorite osso buco from Bella Vista, he'd been planning to spend the evening celebrating another woman's success. A success he'd apparently helped orchestrate. I set the phone down with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb, my mind racing through the implications of what I'd just discovered. The late nights that had become increasingly frequent over the past 6 months. The weekend team-building exercises that seemed to require his presence more often than ever before. The way he'd started putting his phone face down during dinner, claiming he wanted to be more present with me. The anniversary dinner I'd spent all afternoon preparing suddenly felt like a monument to my own naivety. The candles I'd lit seemed to mock the romantic atmosphere I'd tried to create for a man who was planning to spend our anniversary toasting champagne with his mistress. But even as my heart shattered, something else began to crystallize in my mind. A cold, sharp clarity that felt almost foreign after months of accepting his explanations, making excuses for his behavior, and convincing myself that the distance I'd been feeling was just a normal part of long-term marriage. I looked around our kitchen, the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where we'd laughed over Sunday morning coffee, where we'd made plans for a future that I was now realizing might have been an illusion for longer than I wanted to admit. The takeout containers from Bella Vista sat cooling on the counter, our anniversary dinner growing cold just like the marriage I'd been fighting so hard to keep warm. Marcus thought he was being clever orchestrating his affair while keeping me safely tucked away at home. Oblivious, and trust. He thought he could celebrate his mistress's promotion, a promotion he'd helped her earn while I waited for him with anniversary dinner and romantic expectations. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten that before I became his devoted wife, before I'd channeled all my energy into supporting his career and building our life together, I'd been Victoria Sterling, the woman who'd graduated summa cum laude from Whitmore University with a degree in business strategy and communication, the woman who'd never backed down from a challenge or accepted defeat without a fight. As I stared at the phone that had accidentally revealed the truth, I realized that Marcus had no idea who he was really dealing with. He'd grown comfortable with the supportive, accommodating wife I'd become, but he was about to meet the strategic, determined woman I'd always been underneath. The champagne toast at Rosewood Terrace was just the beginning, but it wouldn't end the way Marcus and Diana were expecting. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. The house felt different after reading those messages. The same walls that had sheltered 15 years of marriage suddenly seemed to whisper secrets I'd been too trusting to hear. I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of the life I thought we'd built together, while my mind systematically dismantled every assumption I'd held about my husband and our relationship. I moved through the motions of putting away the anniversary dinner with mechanical precision. The osso buco went into containers, the wine back to the rack, the chocolate-covered strawberries into the refrigerator where they'd remain untouched. Each action felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life implode in slow motion. The dining room table, set for two with our wedding china and flickering candles, looked like a shrine to my own delusion. I blew out the candles one by one, watching the smoke curl upward and disappear, much like the romantic evening I'd envisioned just an hour ago. Marcus's phone had gone silent, but I could still see those messages burned into my memory. The casual way he'd referred to me as V, the emoji-laden exchanges with Diana, the group chat that suggested this wasn't just an affair, it was a social circle I'd never been part of, People who knew about their relationship and were actively participating in keeping me in the dark. I sat down at our kitchen island and forced myself to think analytically rather than emotionally. This was what I'd always been good at, breaking down complex problems into manageable components, seeing patterns that others miss. It's what had made me successful in my career before I'd scaled back to support Marcus's ambitions. The timeline began to crystallize with painful clarity. 6 months ago, Marcus had started staying late at the office more frequently. When I'd expressed concern about his stress levels, he'd assured me it was just temporary, a big project that would lead to significant opportunities for advancement. I'd supported him completely, taking over more household responsibilities and declining social invitations, so he wouldn't feel guilty about his demanding schedule. 4 months ago, he'd started going to more team-building events and professional development workshops. When I'd suggested joining him at company social functions, he'd explained that most of these were working sessions rather than social gatherings, and that bringing spouses would be inappropriate. I'd accepted this explanation, even felt proud that he was so dedicated to his professional growth. 3 months ago, the weekend business trips had begun. Marcus would leave Friday afternoon for strategic planning retreats, or client relationship building in nearby cities. He'd return Sunday evening with stories about boring presentations and endless meetings. I'd never questioned why these trips seemed to energize rather than exhaust him, or why he'd started dressing more carefully for what were supposedly tedious work obligations. 2 months ago, Diana Castellanos had been mentioned in conversation for the first time. Marcus had spoken about her with professional respect, describing her as brilliant and undervalued by upper management. He'd started advocating for her advancement within the company, speaking passionately about the need to recognize talented women in leadership. I'd been proud of his progressive attitude and feminist support of a female colleague. Now I understood that his passionate advocacy had been deeply personal. The promotion Diana had just received, regional marketing director, was the same position Marcus had been working toward for over a year. He'd told me that the company was restructuring and that his advancement would need to wait for the right opportunity. I'd encouraged him to be patient, to continue proving his value while waiting for management to recognize his worth. I thought about the nights I'd massaged his shoulders while he complained about the stress of work, the mornings I'd prepared his favorite coffee and breakfast while he rushed to get to important meetings, the weekends I'd handled everything at home so he could rest and recharge for another demanding week, all while he was building Diana's career instead of his own. The financial implications began to dawn on me as well. Our joint credit card statements had shown increases in restaurant charges and entertainment expenses, but Marcus had explained these as necessary business expenditures for client relationships and team build. The charge for the Cru Grande Cuvée champagne was probably on our account right now. I was essentially paying for them to celebrate her promotion with expensive champagne. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emma. "How's the anniversary dinner going? Did Marcus love the surprise?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How do you explain that your anniversary dinner was cancelled because your husband was too busy celebrating his mistress's promotion? How do you tell someone that the marriage you've been defending and nurturing for 15 years might have been a carefully maintained facade? Instead, I replied, "Plans changed, we'll call you tomorrow." Emma responded immediately, "Everything okay? You sound off." "Just tired. Long day." I set my phone aside and walked to our living room, where framed photos of our life together lined the mantelpiece and side tables. Marcus and me at our wedding, both of us glowing with happiness and hope. Our honeymoon in Tuscany, where we'd promised to return for our 10th anniversary, a trip that had been postponed due to his work commitments. Christmas mornings, birthday celebrations, family gatherings where we'd presented the perfect picture of a strong, loving couple. Had any of it been real for him, or had I been performing a solo act in what I thought was a duet? I picked up our wedding photos, studying Marcus's face for signs I might have missed. He looked genuine, completely present, like a man who couldn't believe his luck in marrying me. But then again, he'd looked genuine this morning when he'd kissed me goodbye and wished me a happy anniversary. The sound of a car door slamming outside made me freeze. I glanced at the clock. 8. Marcus wasn't supposed to be home until much later, if his celebration with Diana followed the pattern of his other recent work events. I quickly placed his phone back exactly where he'd left it and moved to the kitchen, busying myself with wiping down counters that were already clean. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it when he walked in. The front door opened, and I heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway. "Victoria? Sorry I'm back so early," he called out, his voice carrying just the right note of exhaustion and apology. The meeting wrapped up sooner than expected. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before responding. "In the kitchen," I called back, proud that my voice sounded normal. Marcus appeared in the doorway, loosening his burgundy tie and running a hand through his hair. He looked genuinely tired, but there was something else in his expression, a satisfaction he was trying to hide, the look of a man who'd just shared champagne in celebration with someone he cared about. "How was the Thompson Industries presentation prep?" I asked. "Testing. Exhausting," he replied without missing a beat. Diana really had her work cut out for her with those quarterly projections, but I think we got everything sorted out for tomorrow's meeting. The ease with which he lied was almost impressive. No stammering, no avoidance of eye contact, no nervous tells. He'd had plenty of practice. "That's good," I said neutrally. "I kept dinner warm for you." His face softened with what appeared to be genuine affection. "You're amazing, 15 years. And you still take such good care of me." He moved toward me as if to embrace me, and for a moment, I almost let him. The familiar comfort of his arms, the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his body against mine. It would have been so easy to pretend I didn't know what I knew, to sink back into the illusion of our happy marriage. But I stepped back slightly, offering him a small smile instead. "Long day for both of us. Why don't you go change and I'll heat up the ossobuco?" If he noticed my subtle rejection of his physical affection, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded gratefully and headed upstairs to change clothes. As soon as I heard our bedroom door close, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. The man I'd loved and trusted for 15 years had just looked me in the eye and lied about where he'd been, what he'd been doing, and who he'd been with. He'd accepted my care and concern while hiding a relationship that made a mockery of our marriage. But what struck me most wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how good he was at it. This wasn't a recent skill he'd developed for his affair with Diana. This was practiced, polished, perfected deception. How many other lies had I accepted? How many other times had he come home with that same expression of tired satisfaction, feeding me explanations I'd never questioned? I realized I didn't know my husband at all. The man I'd built my life around was a stranger wearing Marcus's face, speaking with Marcus's voice, sleeping in Marcus's place beside me each night. But I also realized something else. If Marcus thought he could continue this charade indefinitely, he had seriously underestimated the woman he'd married. He'd grown comfortable with my trust, my support, my willingness to believe his explanations, and accommodate his needs. He was about to discover that his accommodating wife had a limit to her patience, and tonight he'd found it. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Marcus had left for the office at his usual time, kissing my forehead, and reminding me to take it easy since I seemed a little under the weather. His concern felt like another performance, delivered with the same practiced sincerity as his lies about working late. I waited exactly 30 minutes after his departure before I began what I was already thinking of as my investigation. If Marcus wanted to play games with the truth, I was going to make sure I understood all the rules before I made my next move. My first stop was our home office, where Marcus kept his laptop and important documents. I knew his passwords, we'd shared them early in our marriage, as a gesture of trust and transparency. Apparently that transparency had been more one-sided than I'd realized. His laptop revealed a carefully curated digital life, his email showed the expected work correspondence. But I noticed something interesting. There were very few emails from Diana Castellanos in his work account. For two people who were supposedly collaborating closely on major projects, their official communication was surprisingly sparse. That suggested they were communicating through other channels. I opened his browser history and found it had been recently cleared, something Marcus had never bothered to do in all our years together. The few remaining entries were innocuous: weather, news sites, a search for restaurant reviews in downtown Millfield. But the fact that he'd thought to clear it at all was telling. His social media accounts were equally sanitized. No photos with Diana, no comments on her posts, no obvious signs of anything inappropriate. But when I looked more closely at his Instagram activity, I noticed he'd been liking Diana's posts consistently for months, always her professional achievements, never anything too personal, but with a frequency that suggested he was paying close attention to her online presence. I moved to our financial records next, something I'd always been involved in but had been leaving more to Marcus recently as his work became more demanding. Our joint checking account showed the usual patterns of spending, but when I looked at our credit card statements more carefully, I began to see discrepancies. Restaurant charges that didn't match the evenings Marcus had claimed to be working late, gas station purchases that didn't align with his usual commute route, hotel charges in nearby cities that exceeded what his company typically reimbursed for business travel. When I cross-referenced these charges with his claimed work schedule, the pattern became unmistakable. The most damning evidence was a charge from Meridian Jewelry Company for $1,247, dated just 2 weeks ago. When I called the store claiming to be following up on my husband's recent purchase, the sales associate was happy to confirm the details. A white gold bracelet with sapphire accents, purchased as a professional congratulations gift for someone special. I'd never seen that bracelet, and Marcus had never mentioned buying jewelry for anyone. My next call was to Sarah Chen, my former colleague from Whitmore and Associates, where I'd worked before scaling back my career. Sarah had always been plugged into the professional networks in Millfield, and if Diana Castellanos was making waves in the marketing world, Sarah would know about it. "Victoria, it's been too long," Sarah said warmly when she answered. Actually, I'm calling for a favor," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need some background information on someone in the marketing field. Diana Castellanos at Pinnacle Consulting Group." "Diana Castellanos," Sarah repeated thoughtfully. "I don't know her personally, but I've heard the name. Why do you ask?" "Marcus has been working with her on some big projects, and I'm thinking about reaching out professionally. You know how it is networking through your spouse's connection." It wasn't entirely a lie, though my networking intentions were far from professional. "Let me make some calls and get back to you," Sarah offered. "I have lunch with Michelle Rodriguez from the Marketing Professionals Association tomorrow. She knows everyone in the industry." After hanging up with Sarah, I turned my attention to social media stalking with the thoroughness of a private investigator. Diana's Instagram was public, and scrolling through her posts painted an interesting picture. She was ambitious, confident, and clearly enjoyed the finer things in life. Her apartment, visible in the background of her carefully curated photos, was far more luxurious than what a marketing director's salary should afford. More importantly, her photos from the past 6 months showed subtle changes. Better clothes, expensive accessories, professional photography for her headshots. Someone was investing in Diana Castellanos' image, and I had a strong suspicion about who that someone might be. I found her LinkedIn profile next, which revealed that her promotion to regional marketing director had happened remarkably quickly, faster than typical advancement timelines in corporate environments. Her recommendations were glowing, particularly one from Sterling praising her innovative thinking and collaborative leadership style. Marcus had recommended her for the promotion using his LinkedIn account, something he'd never mentioned to me, despite his supposed excitement about supporting women in the workplace. By noon, I had a clearer picture of the scope of Marcus's deception, but I needed more concrete evidence. I decided to take a drive downtown to Pinnacle Consulting Group's offices. I told myself I was just reconnaissance, getting a feel for Marcus's work environment and the places where his affair was unfolding. The building was a sleek glass tower in Millfield's business district. I parked across the street and waited, feeling slightly ridiculous but unable to stop myself. I wanted to see Diana in person, to understand what had captivated my husband enough to risk our 15-year marriage. At 12:30, I spotted Marcus leaving the building with a group of colleagues. Among them was a woman who matched Diana's photos, tall, elegant, with that distinctive auburn hair. She was laughing at something Marcus had said, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that spoke of intimate familiarity. I watched them walk to Café Luna, a trendy spot 2 blocks away. Through the cafe's windows, I could see them settle at a corner table, their body language comfortable and relaxed. Marcus leaned forward when Diana spoke, giving her his complete attention, in a way I realized he hadn't done with me in months. They weren't holding hands or being overtly romantic, but there was an energy between them that was unmistakable. The kind of chemistry that comes from shared secrets and mutual attraction. I sat in my car for another hour taking photos with my phone whenever they were visible through the window. Not because I planned to use them immediately, but because I was building a case, collecting evidence like I'd once done in my consulting work when clients needed comprehensive analysis of complex problems. When they returned to the office, I drove to the Millfield Public Library and used their computers to research Diana's background more thoroughly. Public records showed her address, her previous employment history, and her financial situation. The apartment she was renting was in Riverside Heights, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. The monthly rent alone was more than what most marketing directors earned in a month. I also discovered that Diana had recently purchased a new BMW, according to DMV records. The down payment alone would have required substantial financial resources that seemed to exceed her legitimate income. My phone buzzed with a call from Sarah Chen. "I have information about Diana Castellanos," she said without preamble. "And Victoria, some of it might be difficult to hear. Tell me everything." According to Michelle, Diana has a reputation for being strategic about her relationships. She's been linked romantically to several influential men in the business community over the past few years. Always older, always married, always in positions to advance her career. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "Go on." "The word is that she just landed a major promotion at Pinnacle Consulting Group, and there are rumors about how she managed to secure it so quickly." Michelle said, "There's talk in professional circles about a mentor relationship that might have crossed some boundaries." Did Michelle mention any name? No specifics, but she did say that Diana was recently seen at several high-profile industry events with someone from Pinnacle's senior management, always at professional functions, always maintaining plausible deniability, but consistent enough that people were starting to note. After hanging up with Sarah, I felt a strange sense of validation mixed with devastation. My instincts had been correct. Diana Castellanos was a woman who made calculated decisions about her relationships, and Marcus had become her latest strategic investment. But the validation came with a bitter realization. I wasn't dealing with a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated campaign, executed by two people who had carefully considered the risks and decided I was worth deceiving. As I drove home, I thought about my next step. I had enough evidence to confront Marcus or to file for divorce. But something inside me wanted more than just an end to the deception. I wanted justice, accountability, and consequences that matched the deliberate nature of their betrayal. Marcus and Diana thought they were cleverly managing their affair while keeping their professional reputations intact. They had underestimated not just my ability to uncover the truth, but my determination to ensure that their careful plans had consequences they hadn't anticipated. The investigation was just the beginning. Now I needed to plan my response. What I discovered over the next 3 days made my initial findings look like surface scratches on a much deeper wound. The affair with Diana wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage, it was part of a systematic pattern of deception that reached into every corner of our life together. It started with an email I almost deleted. I'd been monitoring Marcus's digital communications more carefully, checking his accounts each morning after he left for work. Most of what I found confirmed what I already knew. Carefully sanitized professional exchanges with Diana, strategic meeting schedules, and the ongoing fiction of their mentoring relation. But Thursday morning, buried in his deleted items folder, I found an email thread that had apparently been moved there by accident. The subject line read, "Consultation fee, April through September," and it was from someone named Bradley Thornton, at Thornton Financial Advisory Services. The email detailed a series of payments totaling $47,000 over the past 6 months, described as relationship consultation and strategic planning services. Attached was an invoice breakdown that made my blood run cold. Client relocation assistance, $12,000 professional wardrobe consultation, $8,500 career advancement coaching, $15,000 lifestyle transition support, $11,500. Marcus had been paying a consultant to help Diana upgrade her entire life. I called Thornton Financial immediately, using my most professional voice and claiming to be following up on my husband's account for tax purposes. The receptionist transferred me to Bradley Thornton himself, who was surprisingly forthcoming about the services his company provided. "Miss Sterling has been one of our most dedicated clients," Bradley explained. "It's rare to see someone so committed to supporting a partner's career transition." The comprehensive package he selected for Castellanos included everything from apartment hunting in better neighborhoods to professional styling for executive presence. "Partner?" I repeated carefully. "Business partner, of course," Bradley corrected quickly, but I caught the slight hesitation. The mentoring relationship between senior executives and rising talent often requires significant investment. Mr. Sterling has been very forward-thinking in recognizing Miss Castellanos' potential. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the invoice detail. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been systematically building Diana's entire lifestyle using our money. The expensive apartment, the designer clothes, the BMW, even her professional photography for LinkedIn, it had all been funded by my husband. But that was only the beginning. I spent the afternoon diving deeper into our financial records, armed with new knowledge about what to look for. Hidden in the maze of our joint accounts, I found evidence of a pattern that stretched back nearly 8 months. Marcus had opened a separate credit card account in his name only, something I'd never known about. The statements, which I obtained by calling the company and using my knowledge of his personal information, revealed a spending pattern that told the story of a relationship far more involved than casual meetings or professional mentor. Weekly dinner charges at romantic restaurants throughout Millfield, weekend hotel stays at luxury resorts within driving distance, charges from Victoria's Secret, Nordstrom and high-end lingerie boutique, concert tickets, theater subscriptions, wine club memberships, all the trappings of an expensive romantic relationship. The most disturbing discovery was a charge from Cartwright Fertility Clinic in Brookhaven, a city about an hour away. When I called claiming to be Diana Castellanos following up on recent services, the receptionist confirmed that they had processed payment for a comprehensive fertility consultation and testing package just 6 weeks ago. The implications hit me like a physical blow. While Marcus had been going through the motions of trying to have children with me, attending fertility appointments, following treatment protocols, expressing disappointment when our attempts failed, he'd been secretly taking Diana to fertility consultations in another city. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together, complete with the family that Marcus and I had been struggling to create for 3 years. I needed air. I needed space to process this revelation, without the walls of our home closing in around me. I drove to Riverside Park, where Marcus and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, during the early years of our marriage, when we'd still talked about our dreams and plans with genuine excitement. Sitting on a bench overlooking the lake, I called Emma. My sister answered on the second ring. "Victoria? I've been worried about you since Tuesday. You sounded strange, and when I called yesterday, Marcus said you were under the weather." "Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished." I told her everything. The initial discovery, the investigation, the financial evidence, and finally the fertility clinic revelation. Emma listened without interruption, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I reached the part about them planning to have children together. "Victoria," Emma said finally, her voice tight with anger, "this isn't just an affair. This is like he's been living a completely separate life." "How long do you think this has been going on?" "Based on what I've found, at least 8 months of serious involvement. Maybe longer if it started as casual workplace flirtation before escalating." "What are you going to do?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. But sitting by the lake where Marcus and I had once fed ducks and talked about growing old together, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm going to make sure he faces consequences that match the scope of his deception," I said, This isn't just personal betrayal, Emma. He's been using our money to build another woman's life while lying to me about everything from work meetings to our fertility treatment. There are professional implications, financial crimes, and a level of calculated cruelty that goes beyond simple adultery. When I returned home, I found Marcus in the kitchen, preparing dinner with the kind of domestic attentiveness that had once made me feel cherished. Now it felt like another performance, another layer of the elaborate fiction he'd been maintaining. "Feeling better?" he asked, kissing my cheek as I set down my purse. "I picked up that Thai food you love from Sakura Garden, thought we could have a quiet evening together." The casual kindness of the gesture, combined with everything I now knew about his secret life, made me feel physically sick. This wasn't the behavior of a man who was planning to leave his wife for his mistress. This was the behavior of a man who intended to maintain both relationships indefinitely. "That's thoughtful," I managed. "How was your day at work?" "Busy," he replied, opening containers of pad thai and green curry. "Diana's settling into her new role well, but there's a lot of transition work involved. I'll probably need to put in some extra hours over the next few weeks to make sure everything goes smoothly." The effortless way he wove Diana into casual conversation, disguising his continued involvement in her life as professional obligation, was almost masterful. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have admired his dedication to a colleague's success. "That's generous of you," I said, "supporting her advancement like that." "Well, when you see real talent, you have an obligation to nurture it," Marcus replied, his voice taking on the tone of a man pleased with his own progressive values. "Diana has incredible potential. With the right guidance and support, she could go really far in this industry." As we ate dinner, Marcus told me about his day with the kind of detail that seemed designed to account for every hour. A morning meeting with Thompson Industries, lunch with the marketing team to discuss Q4 strategies, an afternoon reviewing budget proposals. All of it sounded plausible, professional, innocent. But I now knew that embedded within his workday were text messages, coordinating personal plans with Diana, financial transfers to support her lifestyle, and probably moments stolen for private conversations or intimate touches when no one was watching. After dinner, as Marcus settled into his usual evening routine of checking email and watching the news, I excused myself to take a bath, but instead of relaxing in the tub, I sat on the bathroom floor with my laptop, using our guest network to research my options: divorce attorney, private investigators, financial forensics specialists, corporate ethics violations. Each search opened new possibilities for addressing not just the personal betrayal, but the professional misconduct and financial improprieties I'd uncovered. By the time I emerged from the bathroom, I had a preliminary plan forming in my mind. But first, I needed one more piece of crucial information: Diana's perspective on their relationship and their future plan. The next morning, after Marcus left for work, I drove to Pinnacle Consulting Group and waited in the parking garage. When Diana emerged at lunchtime, walking to her BMW with the confident stride of a woman whose life was exceeding all expectations, I followed her. She drove to Meridian Spa, an exclusive wellness center in the affluent Westbrook district. I parked across the street and watched her enter, then called the spa claiming to be interested in their services. "I'm wondering about membership options," I told the receptionist. "A friend of mine, Diana Castellanos, spoke very highly of your facilities." "Oh, Miss Castellanos is one of our premium members," the receptionist gushed. "She just upgraded to our platinum package last month. Would you like to schedule a tour?" After declining the tour, I sat in my car processing this information. The platinum membership at Meridian Spa cost $4,000 annually, another expense that exceeded Diana's legitimate income, but fell perfectly within the range of Marcus's secret financial support. As I drove home, my phone rang. It was Sarah Chen. "Victoria, I have more information about Diana Castellanos," Sarah said, "and I'm afraid it's going to upset you." "Tell me." Michelle heard through the grapevine that Diana has been telling people she's planning to relocate to Seattle next year. Apparently she's been interviewing for senior marketing positions at tech companies out there. But here's the strange part. She's been telling potential employers that her current company is arranging a remote work transition that would allow her to maintain her current role while exploring West Coast opportunities. My heart sank as the implications became clear. Go on. Michelle thinks Diana might be planning to take someone with her. The rumors suggest she's involved with someone from her current company who's also planning a career transition to Seattle, someone senior enough to negotiate remote work arrangements. After hanging up with Sarah, I sat in my driveway staring at our house. The house Marcus and I had bought with dreams of filling it with children and decades of shared memories. Now I understood that while I'd been investing in our future together, Marcus had been planning his exit strategy. The affair wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, it was a carefully orchestrated transition plan designed to move him from one life to another with minimal disruption to his professional standing or financial security. But Marcus had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that his accommodating wife would remain oblivious until his plans were complete. He'd underestimated both my ability to uncover the truth and my determination to ensure that his careful plans had consequences he'd never anticipated. The law offices of Rodriguez, Martinez and Associates occupied the top floor of Millfield's financial tower with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city where my marriage was quietly imploding. I'd chosen Carmen Rodriguez, not just because of her reputation as one of the state's most formidable divorce attorneys, but because she specialized in complex financial cases involving professional misconduct. "Miss Sterling," Carmen said, settling behind her mahogany desk with the thick folder I'd compiled over the past week. "This is one of the most comprehensive documentation packages I've seen from a client. You've essentially conducted a forensic investigation." I'd spent 3 days organizing everything into a coherent narrative. Bank statements, credit card records, email printouts, photographs, phone logs, and detailed timeline. The folder contained enough evidence to support not just a divorce, but potential criminal charges for financial fraud and professional ethics violations. "I wanted to make sure we had a complete picture before moving forward," I replied. "This isn't just about ending a marriage, it's about ensuring appropriate consequences for the scope of deception involved." Carmen nodded approvingly as she reviewed the evidence. "Your husband has been remarkably careless for someone engaging in this level of financial impropriety. The separate credit card alone represents fraudulent use of marital assets. The payments to the financial consultant could be classified as conversion of funds, and if his company has any policies about relationships with subordinates or conflicts of interest." "That's something I need to explore," I said. "I'm not familiar with Pinnacle Consulting Group's internal policies, but most firms have strict guidelines about senior staff using company resources or influence for personal relationships." "I have contacts who can help with that," Carmen assured me. "But first, let's talk about what you want to achieve. Are you seeking maximum financial recovery, professional consequences for your husband, or both?" "I want justice proportional to the betrayal," I said carefully. "Marcus has spent months systematically deceiving me while using our resources to build another woman's life. He's sabotaged our fertility treatments while secretly planning to have children with someone else. This wasn't a mistake or moment of weakness. It was a calculated campaign to transition from one life to another while keeping me as financial and emotional support." Carmen made notes as I spoke. "I can file for divorce immediately based on adultery and financial misconduct. Given the evidence you've provided, I'm confident we can secure a favorable settlement, but if you want to pursue the professional misconduct angle, that will require coordination with his employer and potentially regulatory bodies." "What would that involve?" "We'd need to document how he used his professional position to benefit Diana Castellanos inappropriately, the recommendation letter, the mentoring relationship that clearly crossed boundaries, any company resources used for personal purposes. If Pinnacle has policies against such relationships, they'll be obligated to investigate." I thought about Marcus coming home each evening, kissing my forehead, asking about my day with apparent genuine interest. The cognitive dissonance between his caring husband persona and the calculating man revealed in my investigation still felt surreal. "There's something else," I said. "I've been thinking about the timing of Diana's promotion. If Marcus helped her secure that position through their personal relationship, it could constitute a form of corporate fraud. Other qualified candidates might have legitimate grievances." Carmen's expression sharpened with interest. That's an excellent point. Do you have any information about the promotion process or other candidates who were considered? Not yet, but I think I know how to get it. After leaving Carmen's office, I drove across town to Whitmore and Associates, where I'd worked before scaling back my career to support Marcus's advancement. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was returning to my professional network to address the consequences of sacrificing my career for a man who'd been secretly planning to leave me. Rebecca Whitmore, the firm's managing partner, greeted me with the warmth reserved for former employees who'd left on excellent terms. "Victoria, how wonderful to see you. I heard through the grapevine that you might be considering returning to consulting work." "Actually, I'm here about a different matter," I said. "I need your expertise on a complex professional misconduct case." I'd prepared a sanitized version of the situation that focused on the professional aspects while omitting the personal detail. Rebecca listened with the analytical attention that had made her one of the most respected business consultants in the state. "Based on what you're describing," Rebecca said, "there are multiple potential violations involved. If a senior executive used his position to advance a subordinate's career in exchange for personal favors, that's textbook abuse of power. Most companies have zero-tolerance policies for such behavior." "What would be the typical investigative process?" "First, we'd need to document the professional relationship and any irregularities in the promotion process. Then we'd examine whether company resources were used inappropriately. Finally, we'd look at whether the relationship created unfair advantages for one employee over others." Rebecca paused, studying my face carefully. "Victoria, this sounds personal. Are you involved in this situation somehow?" I'd known Rebecca for 6 years and she'd always been able to read between the lines. "Yes," I admitted. "The senior executive is my husband." Rebecca's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine concern. "Oh, Victoria. I'm so sorry. This must be incredibly difficult." "It is, but I'm determined to handle it strategically rather than emotionally. I spent years building my analytical skills, and now I need to use them to protect myself and ensure appropriate consequences for his actions. What can I do to help?" "I need to understand Pinnacle Consulting Group's internal policies and potentially connect with other employees who might have relevant information about Diana Castellanos's promotion." Rebecca made a few calls while I waited, leveraging her professional network to gather intelligence about Pinnacle's corporate culture and recent personnel changes. Within an hour she'd connected me with Patricia Vance, a former Pinnacle employee who now worked at a competing firm. Patricia agreed to meet me for coffee at neutral location away from both our professional circles. Over lattes at Corner Cafe, she provided insights that confirmed my worst suspicions about the scope of Marcus and Diana's professional misconduct. Diana's promotion was controversial within the company, Patricia revealed. She'd only been there 18 months. And there were several more experienced candidates for the regional marketing director position, but she had significant support from senior management, specifically from Marcus Sterling in strategic development. Was that unusual? Very. Cross-departmental influence in promotions typically requires formal collaboration or documented mentoring relationship. But Marcus and Diana's working relationship seemed to emerge suddenly about 8 months ago. Before that they barely interacted professionally. The timeline aligned perfectly with my evidence of their personal relationship begin. There was talk among the marketing staff about favoritism. Patricia continued. Diana started getting choice assignments, high visibility projects, access to executive meetings that other managers weren't invited to. It created resentment among her peers. Did anyone file complaints? Not officially, but there were informal concerns raised with HR about the appearance of impropriety. Nothing was done because Marcus is well regarded and Diana's work quality was excellent, but people noticed the special treatment. After meeting with Patricia, I had enough information to build a comprehensive case that went far beyond personal betrayal. Marcus and Diana hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been using their professional environment to advance their personal relationship while creating unfair advantages and potential legal liabilities for their employer. That evening, I prepared for what I knew would be a crucial conversation. Marcus arrived home at his usual time, carrying flowers and wearing the slightly guilty expression that I now recognized as his tell for having spent time with Diana. "These are beautiful," I said, accepting the bouquet of white roses. Diana's favorite flowers according to her Instagram posts. What's the occasion? No occasion, he replied, loosening his tie. I just wanted to remind my wife how much I appreciate everything she does for me. The casual cruelty of giving me flowers clearly chosen for another woman was breathtaking in its thoughtlessness. But I maintained my composure, arranging the roses in a vase while Marcus chatted about his day. How's Diana settling into her new role? I asked. Conversational and really well, Marcus replied, his voice taking on the animated tone he always used when discussing her. She's exactly the kind of innovative thinker the company needs in leadership. I'm proud to have played a role in her advancement. That's wonderful, I said. It must be gratifying to see your mentoring efforts pay off so well. It really is. Diana has such potential. She just needed someone to recognize it and provide the right opportunity. As Marcus spoke about Diana with genuine pride and affection, I realized that he wasn't just having an affair. He was genuinely in love with her, completely invested in her success and happiness. The man sitting across from me wasn't conflicted about his choices. He was satisfied with them. That realization crystallized my resolve in a way that all the evidence gathering hadn't. Marcus wasn't a man who'd made a mistake and was struggling with guilt. He was a man who'd made a calculated decision to pursue what he wanted while maintaining the safety net of our marriage until his transition was complete. Later that night, after Marcus had fallen asleep beside me, I lay awake finalizing my strategy. I had comprehensive evidence, professional allies, legal representation, and a clear understanding of the full scope of his deception. But most importantly, I had something Marcus didn't expect: a complete lack of sentimentality about preserving a marriage that had become a facade. The next phase would require precise timing and careful coordination. Marcus and Diana thought they were managing their affair discreetly while maintaining their professional reputation. They had no idea that their carefully constructed fiction was about to encounter someone who specialized in strategic demolition. I'd spent 15 years being the supportive wife, accommodating Marcus's needs and protecting his interests. Now it was time to protect my own interests with the same dedication I'd once applied to his success. The preparation phase was complete. It was time to execute. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, and Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement as he prepared to leave for what he believed was Diana's private celebration dinner. She'd apparently secured a major client contract that afternoon. The Henley Corporation account that would position her as a rising star within Pinnacle's regional operation. This could be a real game changer for Diana's career trajectory, Marcus said as he adjusted his cufflinks, the same gold ones I'd given him for our 10th anniversary. Landing Henley is exactly the kind of high-profile win that gets noticed at the corporate level. I watched him in our bedroom mirror as he perfected his appearance with the kind of attention to detail usually reserved for job interviews or important presentations. His hair was freshly cut, his suit pressed to perfection, and he'd used the expensive cologne I'd bought him last Christmas, the one he claimed was too fancy for everyday wear. "Where are you celebrating?" I asked casually, though I already knew the answer from the messages I'd been monitoring all week. "Rosewood Terrace," he replied, checking his watch. "Small group from the office. I probably won't be too late, but don't wait up if you're tired." The same restaurant where he'd taken me for our 10th anniversary. The place he'd claimed was too pretentious for regular occasions. Now it was apparently perfect for celebrating his mistress's professional achievement. "Have fun," I said, kissing his cheek with the kind of affection that had become as automatic as breathing. "Tell Diana congratulations from me." "I will," Marcus said, his smile brightening at the mention of her name. "She'll appreciate that." After he left, I waited exactly 15 minutes before beginning my own preparations. The black dress I'd chosen was sophisticated without being flashy, the kind of outfit that commanded attention through elegance rather than drama. I'd had my hair done that afternoon and selected jewelry that suggested both confidence and financial success. Tonight wasn't about looking like a scorned wife confronting her husband's mistress. Tonight was about looking like a woman who understood exactly what was happening and had the resources to address it appropriately. I arrived at Rosewood Terrace at 7:45 p.m., 15 minutes before Marcus and Diana's reservation. The hostess was professionally accommodating when I explained that I was meeting my husband and some of his colleagues, and would prefer to be seated at a table with a clear view of the main dining area. Of course, Mrs. Sterling, she said, consulting her reservation system. I see your husband's party is expected at 8. Would you like me to let them know you're here when they arrive? Actually, I'd prefer to surprise them, I said with a smile that I hoped conveyed romantic spontaneity rather than strategic planning. Work has been so demanding lately, and I thought it would be nice to join their celebration unexpectedly. The hostess seated me at a corner table with perfect sightlines to both the entrance and the area where Marcus's party would be dining. I ordered a glass of the house red and settled in to wait, my phone ready to execute the final phase of my carefully orchestrated plan. At exactly 8:03 p.m., Marcus arrived with Diana and 2 other colleagues I recognized from company events, Jake Morrison from marketing and Lisa Chang from business development. They were laughing about something as the hostess led them to their table, the easy camaraderie of people who worked together closely and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Diana looked radiant in a burgundy dress that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. She was animated, gesticulating as she told a story that had the others hanging on every word. Marcus was watching her with the kind of focused attention that spoke of complete fascination, the way he used to look at me during our early courtship. I observed them for 20 minutes, taking careful note of their seating arrangement, their body language, and the easy intimacy that suggested this group had shared many dinners together. Marcus and Diana weren't sitting next to each other, but they didn't need to. Their awareness of each other was constant. Shared glances, synchronized laughter, the subtle way Diana directed many of her comments toward Marcus specifically. When their champagne arrived, Krug Grande Cuvée, the same expensive brand mentioned in the group chat I'd discovered weeks ago, I knew it was time to execute my plan. I excused myself to the restroom and made 2 phone calls from the privacy of the elegant lounge area. The first was to Carmen Rodriguez. It's time, I said simply. Are you certain you want to proceed tonight? Carmen asked. Once we start this process, there's no going back to the way things were, I'm certain. Marcus made his choice months ago. Tonight, I'm making mine. The second call was to James Whitfield, CEO of Pinnacle Consulting Group. I'd obtained his personal number through Rebecca Whitmore's network, and James had agreed to my unusual request after I'd provided him with a preliminary summary of the evidence I'd compiled. Miss Whitfield, this is Victoria Sterling. Are you still available to join me at Rosewood Terrace? I'm 5 minutes away, James replied. Mrs. Sterling, I want to confirm that you understand the implications of what we're about to do. This will likely result in significant professional consequences for the employees involved. I understand completely, I said, and I believe those consequences are appropriate given the scope of the misconduct involved. I returned to my table and waited, watching Marcus raise his champagne flute in what appeared to be a toast to Diana's success. The 4 of them were completely absorbed in their celebration, oblivious to the fact that their evening was about to take a dramatic turn. James Whitfield arrived at 8:47 p.m. exactly as planned. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that had built Pinnacle Consulting Group into one of the region's most respected firms. The hostess clearly recognized him and immediately offered to seat him wherever he preferred. Actually, I'm joining Mrs. Sterling, James said, nodding toward my table. We have some business to discuss. As James approached my table, I saw the exact moment Marcus noticed him. My husband's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then growing alarm as he processed the implications of his CEO's unexpected presence. Mrs. Sterling, James said, settling into the chair across from me with the folder I'd provided him earlier that week. Thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I've had time to review the documentation thoroughly. I appreciate your willingness to address this situation directly, I replied, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet section of the restaurant. Marcus had risen from his chair and was walking toward our table, his face pale but his expression attempting to project casual confidence. Diana and their colleagues remained at their table, watching with growing confusion. James, Marcus said, forcing a smile as he approached. What a surprise to see you here. And Victoria, his voice faltered slightly as he registered my presence. I didn't expect you to join us. Please sit down, Marcus, James said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. We have some serious matters to address. As Marcus reluctantly took a seat at our table, Diana approached with Jake and Lisa following uncertainly behind her. She looked stunning and confident, clearly assuming that whatever was happening could be managed with the right combination of charm and professional courtesy. "Whitfield," Diana said, extending her hand with a bright smile. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you'd be joining our celebration, Miss Castellanos," James replied, not taking her offered hand. "This isn't a social visit. Please, all of you, take a seat. We have significant issues to discuss regarding your professional conduct and its impact on the company." The transformation in the group's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Jake and Lisa exchanged worried glances, clearly understanding that they'd somehow walked into a professional crisis. Diana's confident smile faltered as she registered the serious tone of James's voice. Marcus was staring at me with a mixture of shock and growing panic. "I'm not sure what this is about," Marcus began, but James cut him off with a raised hand. "Miss Sterling has provided me with extensive documentation of professional misconduct involving you and Miss Castellanos," James said, opening the folder on the table. "The evidence includes financial improprieties, abuse of professional relationships, and potential violations of our company's ethics policies." Diana sank into her chair, her face suddenly drained of color. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "What kind of documentation?" I spoke for the first time since Marcus had joined our table, my voice calm and clear. "Bank records showing that Marcus has spent nearly $50,000 of marital assets supporting your lifestyle over the past 8 months. Credit card statements documenting a romantic relationship conducted during business hours and at company events. Evidence that your recent promotion was influenced by factors other than professional merit." The silence that followed felt heavy and dangerous. Marcus was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and something that might have been respect. "You've been investigating us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been uncovering the truth about my marriage and your professional conduct," I replied. "The investigation was necessary because both of you have become remarkably skilled at deception." James cleared his throat, regaining control of the conversation. "Mr. Sterling, Castellanos, you'll both be placed on administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation. You're required to surrender your company devices and access cards immediately." "This is insane," Diana said, her voice rising slightly. "Miss Sterling, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I've discovered enough," I interrupted, my tone sharp enough to cut through her protest. "I've discovered that you've been accepting financial support from a married colleague in exchange for personal favor. I've discovered that your promotion was influenced by a romantic relationship with a senior executive, and I've discovered that both of you have been using company resources to facilitate an affair while systematically deceiving everyone around you." The restaurant had grown quiet around us, other diners clearly sensing the drama unfolding at our table. Marcus looked as though he might be sick, while Diana appeared to be calculating her options for damage control, but it was too late for damage control. The confrontation I'd planned so carefully was proceeding exactly as I'd envisioned, and Marcus and Diana were finally facing consequences that matched the scope of their deception. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded with the swift precision of a controlled demolition. Within hours of that Friday evening at Rosewood Terrace, the carefully constructed facades that Marcus and Diana had maintained began crumbling under the weight of professional scrutiny and public exposure. James Whitfield wasted no time implementing damage control measures for Pinnacle Consulting Group. Before the weekend was over, both Marcus and Diana had been formally suspended pending a comprehensive internal investigation. Their company devices, access cards, and parking privileges were revoked, and HR had initiated protocols for reviewing all client relationships and project assignments they'd been involved with over the past year. The speed of their professional downfall was breathtaking to witness. Marcus arrived home Saturday morning, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years overnight. He'd clearly spent Friday night at a hotel, probably the same chain where he'd been conducting weekend getaways with Diana, and his usually impeccable appearance was disheveled and defeated. "We need to talk," he said, setting his overnight bag in our foyer with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain dignity in an impossible situation. "Yes, we do," I agreed, leading him to our living room, where I'd arranged the divorce papers Carmen Rodriguez had prepared. But first, I think you should understand the full scope of what's happening. I handed him a folder containing copies of everything I'd discovered: bank statements, credit card records, hotel receipts, the fertility clinic documentation, and most damaging of all, the correspondence with Bradley Thornton's consulting firm detailing the comprehensive lifestyle upgrade Marcus had financed for Diana. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the evidence. Each page seemed to drain more color from his face as he realized how thoroughly his deception had been documented, and how completely his privacy had been violated. "You've been investigating me for weeks," he said finally, his voice hollow with disbelief. "I've been uncovering the truth about my marriage," I corrected, "something that became necessary when my husband stopped telling me the truth about anything significant in his life." "Victoria, I can explain." "No," I interrupted firmly. "The time for explanations ended when you chose to celebrate Diana's promotion instead of honoring our 15th wedding anniversary. The time for explanations ended when you spent $50,000 of our money building another woman's life while lying to my face about fertility treatment." Marcus set down the folder and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of defeat and something that might have been admiration for the thoroughness of my strategic response. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want a divorce," I said simply, "and I want you to face appropriate consequences for the financial fraud and professional misconduct you've committed." The legal proceedings moved forward with remarkable efficiency. Carmen Rodriguez had crafted an ironclad case based on the evidence I'd provided, and Marcus's attorney, David Chen, a competent but overwhelmed family lawyer, quickly advised his client to negotiate rather than fight. The financial settlement was particularly satisfying. Given the documented evidence of Marcus's misuse of marital assets, Carmen was able to secure not only an equitable division of our legitimate shared property, but also restitution for the money he'd spent on Diana's lifestyle upgrades. "Your husband essentially used marital funds to finance his affair," Carmen explained during one of our strategy sessions. "That constitutes both adultery and financial misconduct, which gives us significant leverage in settlement negotiation. The house, which we'd purchased together but which I'd maintained and improved throughout our marriage, would be mine. The retirement accounts would be split, but Marcus would be responsible for repaying the $47,000 he'd spent on Diana's wardrobe, apartment deposits, and lifestyle consulting. Most importantly, he would have no claim to the business I was rebuilding with Rebecca Whitmore. But the professional consequences proved even more devastating than the financial ones. James Whitfield's internal investigation revealed layers of misconduct that extended far beyond the personal relationship between Marcus and Diana. They had violated company policies regarding conflicts of interest, misused corporate resources for personal purposes, and created liability issues that potentially affected multiple client relationships. The Henley Corporation contract that Diana secured, James explained during a meeting in his office the following Tuesday, was apparently influenced by information Marcus provided about our competitors' bidding strategies, information he obtained through his position in strategic development. The implications were staggering. Not only had Marcus helped Diana advance her career through their personal relationship, but he'd also provided her with confidential business intelligence that gave her unfair advantages in client negotiation. "We're terminating both employees immediately," James continued, "and we're reviewing all contracts and client relationships they've been involved with to assess potential legal exposure." The professional consequences rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Within the close-knit business community of Millfield, news of the scandal spread quickly through networks of professional contacts, industry associations, and corporate partnerships. Diana's carefully cultivated reputation as a rising marketing star was destroyed overnight. The Henley Corporation contract was rescinded when the circumstances of how she'd secured it became known. Other clients began questioning the ethics of working with someone who'd advanced her career through personal relationships, rather than professional merit. Marcus's reputation suffered even more comprehensive damage. As a senior executive who'd used his position to benefit a romantic partner, he was seen as a liability by other firms in the industry. The professional networks he'd spent years building suddenly became sources of whispered conversations about his lack of integrity and poor judgment. The the social consequences were equally swift and merciless. Emma called me Tuesday evening with updates from our shared circle of friends and neighbors in Willowbrook Heights. Everyone's talking about it, she reported with barely concealed satisfaction. The Hendersons mentioned they'd noticed Marcus acting differently at the neighborhood barbecue last month. Sarah from book club said she always thought there was something off about how much he'd been traveling for work lately. The retrospective analysis was fascinating to observe. People who had accepted Marcus's explanations about his demanding work schedule now remembered inconsistencies they'd overlooked at the time. Social events where he'd seemed distracted or eager to leave early were reinterpreted through the lens of his secret relationship. Linda Morrison said she saw Marcus and a woman who looked like Diana at the Riverside Mall food court 3 weeks ago. Emma continued, at the time she just thought it was a work meeting, but now she realizes they were holding hands. The most satisfying consequence, however, was watching Marcus and Diana's relationship implode under the pressure of public scrutiny and professional ruin. By Wednesday it became clear that their romantic partnership couldn't survive the stress of their mutual professional destruction. Diana, facing the loss of her career and reputation, apparently decided that Marcus was more liability than asset in her future plans. Patricia Vance, my contact at the competing firm, called with an update that felt like poetic justice. Diana tried to interview with us yesterday, Patricia reported. She's claiming that the whole situation was Marcus's idea, that he pursued her aggressively and that she was essentially a victim of workplace harassment. The irony was perfect. The woman who had strategically used personal relationships to advance her career was now attempting to portray herself as a victim of the very man she'd been planning a future with just days earlier. What did your company tell her? That her reputation in the industry makes her unemployable at any reputable firm. The story of how she advanced her career has spread throughout the professional community. No company wants to risk the liability of hiring someone with her track record. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering that 15 years of marriage couldn't be easily discarded when convenient. He'd apparently assumed that once his affair was exposed, he could simply transition from our marriage to his relationship with Diana without significant consequences. Instead, he found himself alone, professionally ruined, and facing financial obligations that would take years to satisfy. Thursday afternoon, he called me for the first time since the confrontation at Rosewood Terrace. Victoria, he said, his voice carrying a note of desperation I'd never heard before. I need to ask you something. What is it, Marcus? Is there any way? Do you think there's any possibility we could work through this? I know I made terrible mistakes, but maybe with counseling, with time. The question was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Marcus, I said gently, you spent 8 months systematically deceiving me while planning a future with another woman. You used our money to build her life while sabotaging our fertility treatment. You celebrated her promotion on our anniversary. There is no working through that level of betrayal. But Diana, it's over. She won't even take my calls. I realize now that what we had wasn't real, that I threw away everything good in my life for something that was just an illusion. That's unfortunate for you, I replied, but the consequences of your choices aren't something I'm responsible for managing anymore. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of closure that had been building since that first night when I'd discovered the truth about my marriage. Marcus was finally facing the reality of what he'd lost, but it was too late for remorse to change anything. The immediate fallout from the confrontation had exceeded even my strategic expectation. Marcus and Diana's carefully planned affair had been exposed, their professional reputations destroyed, and their relationship had collapsed under the weight of consequences they'd never anticipated. Justice, I realized, sometimes arrives exactly when it's most needed. 3 months after the confrontation at Rosewood Terrace, I sat in Judge Margaret Harrison's courtroom watching the final dissolution of my 15-year marriage. The legal proceedings had moved with unusual speed, largely due to Marcus's decision to accept the settlement terms rather than face a prolonged court battle that would only expose more of his misconduct to public scrutiny. Carmen Rodriguez had outdone herself. The settlement agreement not only secured my financial future, but also included provisions that would prevent Marcus from benefiting from any shared assets or investments we built together during our marriage. The house in Willowbrook Heights was now entirely mine, along with the majority of our retirement savings and full ownership of the investment portfolio I'd managed throughout our marriage. Mr. Erling, Judge Harrison said, reviewing the final documents. The court finds that the evidence of financial misconduct and marital asset misappropriation clearly supports the settlement terms as presented. The divorce is granted, and the property division as agreed upon by both parties is hereby approved. Marcus sat at the defendant's table looking like a shadow of the confident executive I'd married. His attorney, David Chen, had advised him that fighting the settlement would likely result in criminal charges for financial fraud, given the extensive documentation of his misuse of marital funds. The $47,000 restitution payment had been structured as a 5-year plan that would consume most of his disposable income, assuming he could find employment that matched his previous salary level. That assumption was proving increasingly unlikely. The professional consequences of the Pinnacle Consulting scandal had created a ripple effect throughout Millfield's business community that effectively blacklisted both Marcus and Diana from their chosen industry. James Whitfield's investigation had uncovered additional ethical violations that resulted in the company implementing new policies and procedures to prevent similar misconduct, but the damage to their reputations was irreversible. After the court session concluded, I walked out of the courthouse as a single woman for the first time in 16 years. The sensation was both liberating and disorienting, like stepping into sunlight after spending months in a dimly lit room. Emma was waiting for me on the courthouse steps, her face glowing with satisfaction at seeing justice finally delivered. "How does it feel?" she asked as we walked toward the parking garage. "Complicated," I admit. "I'm relieved it's over, but there's also something surreal about ending 15 years with a judge's signature and a stack of legal documents." "You did the right thing," Emma said firmly. "Marcus made his choices and now he gets to live with the consequence. You protected yourself and made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the same way." That afternoon, I met with Rebecca Whitmore to finalize the partnership agreement that would officially make me a senior consultant at Whitmore & Associates. Rebecca had been instrumental in helping me rebuild my professional identity during the divorce proceedings, and her offer to return to consulting work had provided both financial security and renewed sense of purpose. "Your experience with the Pinnacle situation has already generated significant interest from other companies," Rebecca explained as we reviewed my client portfolio. "Word has spread about your investigative skills and strategic thinking. Several firms have specifically requested your services for internal compliance reviews." The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's professional misconduct had inadvertently launched my return to a career I'd sacrificed to support his advancement. Companies throughout the region now wanted to hire the woman who had methodically exposed and documented corporate fraud at one of their peer organizations. "There's something poetic about that," I said, signing the partnership documents that would make me a part owner of the firm within 5 years. "Poetic justice," Rebecca agreed. "You've turned the worst betrayal of your life into the foundation for your professional comeback." The financial aspects of my new independence required careful planning and strategic thinking. Carmen Rodriguez had recommended a forensic accountant to help me understand the full scope of our marital assets and ensure that Marcus hadn't hidden additional resources that should be included in the settlement. What we discovered was both encouraging and infuriating. Marcus had been far more financially irresponsible than even my investigation had revealed. Beyond the documented expenses for Diana's lifestyle, he had accumulated significant debt through credit cards and personal loans that he'd hidden from me throughout our marriage. The debt load explained why he'd been so resistant to my suggestions about increasing our retirement contributions or upgrading our home. He'd been secretly struggling to manage payments on obligations I'd known nothing about. "Your husband has approximately $73,000 in undisclosed debt," the forensic accountant, Michael Torres, explained during our review session. "Much of it appears to be related to maintaining the lifestyle he felt necessary to compete with Diana's expectations." The revelation was simultaneously validating and disturbing. Marcus hadn't just been deceiving me about his affair. He'd been lying about our entire financial situation while making decisions that jeopardized our long-term security. "The good news," Michael continued, "is that most of this debt is in his name only and predates the formal separation. You have no legal obligation to help satisfy these debts, and they can't be used to claim additional marital assets." The documentation of Marcus's financial irresponsibility strengthened my position even further and provided additional justification for the settlement terms that had initially seemed generous in my favor. While the legal and financial aspects of the divorce proceeded smoothly, the emotional closure proved more complex and gradual. I found myself grieving not just the end of my marriage, but the realization that the marriage I thought I'd been living had been largely fiction. The man I'd loved and supported for 15 years had been systematically deceiving me about fundamental aspects of his character, his values, and his commitment to our shared future. Angela Morrison, the therapist Carmen had recommended, helped me process the unique trauma of discovering that my entire adult life had been built on lies. What you're experiencing isn't just the grief of divorce, Dr. Morrison explained during one of our sessions. You're also grieving the loss of your own memories and experiences. When someone systematically deceives you for an extended period, it calls into question your ability to trust your own perceptions and judge. The therapy sessions were essential for helping me distinguish between Marcus's failures and my own choices. I'd been a good wife, a supportive partner, and a loving spouse. His decision to betray that trust reflected his character, not mine. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the resolution phase was watching the natural consequences of Marcus and Diana's choices continue to unfold. Diana had indeed left Millfield entirely, relocating to Portland, where she'd taken a significant step down to a junior marketing position at a small nonprofit organization. The comprehensive background checks that most companies now conducted had made her previous experience at Pinnacle more liability than asset. Marcus, meanwhile, had been forced to accept a position as a project coordinator at a mid-sized firm in a neighboring city, a role that paid roughly half his previous salary and required a daily commute that consumed both time and gas money he could barely afford. Patricia Vance provided occasional updates about their professional struggles with the detached curiosity of someone observing a cautionary tale. Diana apparently tried to reconnect with Marcus about 6 weeks ago, Patricia reported during one of our quarterly coffee meetings. I heard through mutual contacts that she was struggling financially and thought he might be willing to help her get established in Portland. How did that go? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus is barely managing his own expenses with the restitution payments and reduced income. Plus, I think he finally understood that she'd never been genuinely interested in him as a person. She'd been interested in what he could provide, financially, professionally, socially. When those benefits disappeared, so did her interest in the relationship. The final piece of closure came through an unexpected source. Jake Morrison, one of the colleagues who'd witnessed the confrontation at Rosewood Terrace, reached out to me through LinkedIn with a message that provided insight into how my actions had affected the broader workplace culture at Pinnacle Consulting Group. Miss Sterling, his message read, "I wanted to thank you for having the courage to expose what was happening between Marcus and Diana. Your actions led to important policy changes at our company and created conversations about workplace ethics that were long overdue. Several employees have told me privately that they're grateful someone was willing to hold leadership accountable for behavior that was creating an unfair and uncomfortable work environment." Jake's message reminded me that the consequences of Marcus and Diana's actions had extended far beyond our personal relationships. Their misconduct had affected colleagues, clients, and the overall integrity of their workplace. By exposing their behavior, I'd helped create accountability that benefited everyone who worked honestly and ethically within that environment. As I settled into my new life, living alone in the house that was now entirely mine, building a consulting practice based on my own skills and reputation, managing finances that reflected only my own choices and priorities, I realized that the resolution phase of this crisis had been about much more than ending a marriage. It had been about reclaiming my identity, my agency, and my future from someone who had tried to sacrifice all three for his own selfish purposes. The legal proceedings were complete, the financial arrangements were in place, and the professional consequences had been delivered. But most importantly, I had closed the door on a chapter of my life that had been built on deception and opened a new chapter based on truth, integrity, and possibilities I was excited to explore. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the renovated home office that had once been Marcus's domain, looking out at the cherry tree we'd planted together 15 years ago. It was blooming again, its branches heavy with pink blossoms that caught the morning light streaming through windows I'd had enlarged to create a brighter, more open workspace. The symbolism wasn't lost on growth, renewal, beauty emerging from what had seemed like dead wood during the long winter of my marriage's final year. The house itself had become a reflection of my transformation. Without Marcus's preference for dark, traditional furnishings and his resistance to change, I'd been free to create spaces that reflected my own taste and personality. The living room now featured contemporary furniture in warm cream and sage tones, with artwork from local artists that brought color and life to walls that had felt increasingly stagnant during the final years of our marriage. Most significantly, I'd converted Marcus's former home office into a space that served both my consulting work and my personal interest. Built-in shelving displayed the business books I'd accumulated over the years alongside novels I'd never had time to read when my evenings were spent supporting someone else's career goals. A comfortable reading chair sat near the window, positioned to catch both natural light and the view of the garden I was redesigning. The financial independence I'd secured through the divorce settlement had provided more than just security. It had given me the freedom to make choices based on my own priorities for the first time in over a decade. My consulting practice with Whitmore and Associates had exceeded even Rebecca's optimistic projection. Word about my handling of the Pinnacle Consulting investigation had spread throughout the regional business community, creating demand for my services that sometimes required turning away potential clients. "You've become something of a legend," Rebecca told me during our quarterly partnership review. "Companies are specifically requesting the consultant who exposed the executive misconduct at Pinnacle. You've essentially created a new specialization in corporate relationship ethics." The irony continued to amuse me. Marcus's betrayal had inadvertently launched my career into a niche that was both personally meaningful and professionally lucrative. I was helping other companies identify and address the kind of workplace misconduct that had destroyed my marriage, turning my painful experience into a service that protected other employees and organizations. My client roster now included 3 Fortune 500 companies, 2 government agencies, and a non-profit organization that worked with abuse survivors. Each case drew on the investigative skills, analytical thinking, and strategic planning that I'd developed during my marriage, but had never fully utilized until Marcus forced me to defend myself. The personal growth had been equally dramatic, though more gradual and sometimes painful to acknowledge. Dr. Morrison and I had been working together for 8 months, and our sessions had evolved from crisis management to genuine personal development. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair was different from the woman who now sat in therapy sessions exploring her own dreams, boundaries, and aspirations. "When was the last time you made a major decision based entirely on what you wanted, without considering how it would affect Marcus or support his goals?" Dr. Morrison had asked during one of our early sessions. The question had stopped me cold. I'd realized that I couldn't remember making a significant choice about career, living situation, social activities, or even vacation destinations, without Marcus's preferences being the primary consideration. That's not unusual for people who've been in long-term relationships, Morrison had assured me, but it's also not healthy when it becomes so complete that you lose touch with your own desires and needs. The process of rediscovering my own preferences and priorities had been both exhilarating and occasionally overwhelming. Simple decisions like choosing paint colors for the house or selecting restaurants for dinner with friends required a level of self-reflection I hadn't exercised in years, but the more significant transformations were in my approach to relationships and my understanding of my own work. Emma had introduced me to her book club, a group of professional women who met monthly to discuss literature and share the kind of honest conversations that had been missing from my social life during the final years of my marriage. These women, teachers, lawyers, business owners, and retirees, provided perspectives on independence, ambition, and personal fulfillment that challenged assumptions I'd held about what constituted a successful life. "You seem different every time I see you," Sarah Chen observed during one of our renewed monthly lunches. "More present, I guess, like you're fully engaged with your own life instead of managing someone else." Sarah's observation reflected something I'd been feeling but hadn't quite articulated. For years I'd been living my life in service to Marcus's goals and schedule, experiencing my own days through the lens of how they supported or conflicted with his needs. Now, for the first time since my early 20s, I was living my life for myself, The dating question had come up frequently in conversations with friends and family, but I'd been clear about my need for emotional and psychological space before considering romantic relationship. I spent 15 years defining myself in relation to someone else. I'd explained to Emma when she'd suggested introducing me to a divorced colleague. I need to understand who I am as an individual before I consider sharing my life with someone new. That didn't mean I was closed to the possibility of future relationships, but I was determined that any romantic partnership I entered would be between two complete individuals, rather than one person filling gaps in another's identity. The most unexpected aspect of my transformation had been the emergence of interests and ambitions I'd suppressed or abandoned during my marriage. I'd enrolled in a photography class at the community college, something I'd wanted to do for years, but had always postponed due to Marcus's schedule or our financial priorities. The creative outlet had awakened a part of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. My instructor, Maria Santos, had encouraged me to consider exhibiting some of my work at a local gallery. "You have an interesting eye for composition," Maria had told me after reviewing my portfolio. "There's something about your perspective that finds beauty in transitions and transformation." These images of architecture, landscapes, people, they all seemed to capture moments of change. I'd also started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helped women navigate divorce and domestic violence situations. My experience with financial investigation and strategic planning had proved valuable in helping other women understand their legal options and protect their assets during relationship crises. The volunteer work was emotionally demanding but deeply satisfying. Every woman I helped gather evidence or understand her financial situation felt like a small victory against the kind of deception and manipulation I'd experienced. "You saved my life," one client, Jennifer Walsh, had told me after I'd helped her document her husband's hidden assets and secret spending. "I thought I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong. You showed me that my instincts were right, and gave me the tools to protect myself and my children." These conversations reminded me that my experience, as painful as it had been, could serve a purpose beyond my own healing and growth. The house in Willowbrook Heights had become a sanctuary that reflected my new priorities and interests. The guest room was now a photography studio where I developed film and edited digital images. The basement had been converted into a fitness area where I'd taken up yoga and strength training, physical activities that helped me process stress and build the kind of physical confidence that paralleled my emotional growth. Even my relationship with food had changed. Cooking, for one, had initially felt lonely and purposeless, but I'd gradually discovered the pleasure of preparing meals that reflected my own tastes without considering Marcus's preferences or schedule. I'd taken a French cooking class and learned to make dishes that were both satisfying and beautiful, creating experiences for myself that felt luxurious and celebratory. The cherry tree outside my office window had become a symbol of the cycles of growth and renewal that characterized my new life. During the winter months following the divorce, its bare branches had seemed to mirror my own sense of emptiness and uncertainty. But spring had brought new growth, and now its blossoms represented the beauty that could emerge from periods of apparent dormancy. Friends and family frequently commented on the visible changes in my demeanor and energy. The woman who had spent years accommodating someone else's needs and managing someone else's schedule had been replaced by someone who moved through the world with purpose and confidence. "You seem younger," my neighbor Linda had observed when I'd run into her at the grocery store. "There's something lighter about you, like you're not carrying a heavy weight anymore." Linda's observation was more accurate than she probably realized. I'd been carrying the weight of a relationship that required constant management, constant accommodation, and constant vigilance about Marcus's moods and needs. Without that burden, I'd rediscovered energy and enthusiasm that I'd forgotten I possessed. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There were still moments of loneliness, particularly in the evenings when the house felt too quiet, or during holidays when the absence of a partner was most noticeable. But these moments were balanced by a deep sense of authenticity and self-determination that made the solitude preferable to the false companionship I'd experienced during the final years of my marriage. As I sat in my office that spring morning, reviewing client files and planning my schedule for the week ahead, I realized that the woman Marcus had betrayed no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, more self-aware and more committed to living according to her own values and priorities. The transformation was complete, but the growth was ongoing. Each day brought new opportunities to make choices that reflected my authentic self rather than someone else's expectations or needs. 1 year and 3 months after that first devastating text message, I received an email that would test everything I'd built during my transformation. The sender was Marcus, and the subject line read, "Please read." I stared at the notification on my phone for several minutes before opening it, my finger hovering over the delete button. The woman I'd been a year ago would have either deleted it immediately in anger, or opened it instantly out of curiosity and residual emotional attachment. The woman I'd become chose a third option. I set the phone aside and finished my morning routine before deciding how to respond. After my yoga practice, coffee preparation, and review of the day's client schedule, I opened Marcus's email in my home office, sitting in the chair that faced the cherry tree now heavy with summer fruit. "Victoria," the message began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you delete this without reading it. But I needed to tell you that I've been accepted into a behavioral therapy program in Chicago. I'm finally getting the help I should have sought years ago to understand why I made the choices that destroyed our marriage and hurt you so deeply. I also wanted you to know that I've been following your professional success from a distance. Seeing what you've accomplished with your consulting practice has made me realize how much I held you back during our marriage. You've become everything I always knew you could be, and I'm genuinely happy for you, even though I know my happiness means nothing to you now. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to suggest we try again. I know the damage I caused is irreparable. I'm writing because my therapist says that taking full accountability requires acknowledging the harm I caused to the people I claim to love. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty, loyalty, and a partner who celebrated your strength instead of taking advantage of it. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to understand what I had. I hope your life continues to be everything you want it to be. You've earned every bit of happiness and success you've found." Marcus, I read the email twice, waiting for the emotional response that would have once consumed me. Anger, sadness, hope, confusion. Any of the feelings that would have overwhelmed the woman who'd discovered her husband's betrayal just over a year ago. Instead, I felt a calm sense of closure, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Marcus's words were probably sincere. The man who'd written this email was likely experiencing genuine remorse and beginning to understand the scope of damage he'd caused. But his growth, his therapy, his newfound self-awareness were no longer relevant to my life in any meaningful way. I forwarded the email to Dr. Morrison with a note. "Received this today. Would like to discuss in our session next week." Then I deleted it from my inbox and returned to preparing for my afternoon client meeting. The client was Meridian Technology, a startup founded by 3 women who'd approached me after learning about my work with corporate relationship ethics. They suspected that one of their co-founders was using her position to benefit her romantic partner, who worked for a competing firm, and they needed help documenting potential conflicts of interest. "The situation feels familiar," explained Jessica Hart, Meridian's CEO, as we reviewed the evidence they'd compiled. "Sarah has been making decisions that seem to benefit TechFlow Solutions rather than our company, and we recently discovered she's been in a relationship with their head of business development for several months." The parallels to my own experience were unmistakable, but I approached the case with the professional detachment I'd developed over months of similar consultations. My personal history with betrayal and deception had become a professional asset rather than an emotional trigger. "Based on what you've shown me," I told Jessica after reviewing their documentation, "you have grounds for a formal investigation and potentially legal action if the conflict of interest has resulted in financial losses for your company." The meeting concluded with Meridian retaining my services for a comprehensive investigation that would likely take several weeks to complete. As I drove home, I reflected on how my response to Marcus's email and my handling of the Meridian case demonstrated the completeness of my transformation. The woman who'd been devastated by discovering her husband's affair had become someone who could clinically analyze similar situations for other people, providing objective guidance based on hard-won expertise rather than emotional reaction. That evening, Emma called to check in on me, as she'd been doing regularly since the divorce. "You sound different," she observed during our conversation. "More Settled, I guess, like you've reached some kind of equilibrium. I think I have, I replied, looking out at the garden I'd been tending with increasing skill and confidence. Marcus emailed me today. Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible. What did he want? Are you okay? He wanted to apologize and take accountability for the damage he caused, I said. And yes, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Reading his email felt like closing a book I'd already finished rather than reopening an old wound. How do you feel about him reaching out? I considered the question carefully. I feel nothing, really. His apology doesn't change anything that happened, and it doesn't affect anything in my current life. It's like receiving an apology from someone I used to know, who made poor choices that briefly affected my life before I moved on completely. Emma was quiet for a moment. That's remarkable, Victoria. A year ago, any contact from Marcus would have devastated you for days. A year ago, I was still defining myself in relation to him and what he'd done to me, I replied. Now I define myself by who I've chosen to become and what I'm building for my future. The weekend brought another test of my transformation, though one I'd been anticipating for months. Rebecca Whitmore had invited me to the annual Business Excellence Awards dinner, where I'd been nominated for professional achievement in consulting services. The nomination itself was gratifying recognition of how quickly I'd rebuilt my career, but the event would also be attended by many people from Millfield's business community, who knew about my divorce and the circumstances that had led to Marcus and Diana's professional downfall. A year ago, the prospect of facing public scrutiny and potentially uncomfortable conversations would have filled me with anxiety. Now, as I prepared for the event, I felt confident and proud of what I'd accomplished. I chose a midnight blue dress that projected both elegance and authority, paired with jewelry that reflected my success without being ostentatious. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who commanded respect through her achievements rather than seeking validation through others' approval. The awards dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Millfield Marriott, the same venue where Marcus and I had attended numerous corporate events during our marriage. But instead of feeling nostalgic or uncomfortable, I experienced the satisfaction of returning to this space as an independent professional rather than someone's supportive spouse. Throughout the evening, colleagues and acquaintances approached me with congratulations and recognition of my professional accomplishments. Several mentioned how impressed they'd been with my handling of the situation at Pinnacle Consulting, with one CEO noting that my approach had set a new standard for accountability in our business community. The most meaningful moment came when James Whitfield approached me during the cocktail reception. "Mrs. Sterling, or should I say Ms. Sterling now," he said with a respectful nod. "I wanted to thank you again for bringing the situation at our company to my attention. The policy changes we implemented as a result of your investigation have strengthened our workplace culture significantly. I'm glad something positive came from such a difficult situation," I replied. "Your courage in addressing misconduct when you could have simply walked away quietly has had ripple effects throughout our industry," James continued. "Other companies have implemented similar oversight procedures, and I believe the professional environment is better for everyone as a result." When the awards were announced, I wasn't surprised that another consultant with more years of experience won in my category. But the standing ovation I received when my nomination was announced felt like recognition of something more significant than professional achievement. It was acknowledgement of personal transformation and the courage to rebuild after betrayal. The evening concluded with conversations about future collaborations and potential projects that would expand my practice even further. As I drove home, I realized that this public appearance had served as the final test of my transformation. I'd faced a room full of people who knew my story, many of whom had witnessed the destruction of my marriage. And instead of feeling diminished or defined by that history, I'd felt empowered by how I'd used those experiences to build something meaningful. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in the house that was now completely my own, I reflected on the year that had changed everything about my life. The woman who'd discovered that devastating text message felt like a character from someone else's story. Someone I could remember with compassion but no longer related to personal. In her place was someone who'd learned that betrayal, while painful, could also be liberating when it forced you to discover your own strength. Someone who'd transformed the worst experience of her life into the foundation for a career that helped other people navigate similar crises. Someone who'd learned to live authentically, make decisions based on her own values, and build relationships that honored rather than diminished her sense of self. The cherry tree outside my bedroom window was visible in the moonlight, its branches heavy with fruit that would soon be ready for harvest. Like my own growth, it had moved through seasons of dormancy and renewal to reach this point of abundance. Marcus's apology email, archived and forgotten, had served its purpose not as an opportunity for reconciliation or closure I needed from him, but as confirmation that I no longer needed anything from him at all. His growth, his therapy, his remorse were his responsibility and his journey. My journey had led me here to a life of purpose, independence, and authentic self-expression that was entirely my own creation. The final test had been passed not because I'd forgiven him, but because I'd transcended the need for his acknowledgement, apology, or approval. I was complete without him, successful despite him, and happier than I'd ever been because of the strength I'd discovered in myself when he'd forced me to choose between accepting deception and demanding truth. The transformation was not just complete, it was permanent, unshakable, and entirely mine. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.